Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Life Inspirations with Rue and Raz. We are continuing with our series on living life or doing life intentionally and just going through the journey of how we are doing life intentionally, starting from when we met, when we started dating. And on our last episodes, we were talking about what we did individually, separately, intentionally as we were preparing for dating before we met. And so in this episode, we're going to be sharing about what we did intentionally when we were dating in the early days of the dating, as we're starting our journey towards marriage, I guess. So I'll start. One of the first things that we did, or I can say he did intentionally, was he asked me to be his girlfriend. And I think it was after our first date. Yeah, he took me on a first date, and then after that, at the end of that first date, he actually asked me to be his girlfriend, which was very interesting for me because by then in those days it was very rare for someone to ask someone to be their girlfriend. But it was a good way to start because then it really defined the fact that we were getting into a relationship, and this was going to set the tone for the intentionality of everything else that we were going to do after that. So for me as the girl, it actually spoke volumes of where he was planning to take us in terms of the relationship. And because of that, I actually didn't hesitate to say yes, because it's in like nowadays, even back those days, people just fell into relationships or they just dated, but it was never really defined. No one knew if
What
you're
it
dating
was.
or not. No one knows what it was. You just go with the vibe and then you'll see. And for someone to actually ask me officially and say, would you be my girlfriend, for me it spoke volumes about the kind of journey that he was going to take me on if we're saying that we're doing this together.
And I think maybe my context is that I actually wanted something that was very defined. I knew I was at a stage in my life where I was serious and I wasn't just going for the vibes. So I actually wanted to tell someone, or in this instance you, that my intention is to actually exclusively date you and exclusively get to know you and build something with you. So I think on my side, to piggyback from that, what I was also trying to set the tone of is that the relationship we were entering had a purpose and had an objective. So we were not just going to just date indefinitely. I knew that for me to then eventually say to you, would you be my wife or would you marry me? I needed to formalize the journey that we were going to go into. So that's where the will you be my girlfriend came from. And I think what was also very important was right from the start, I knew that the purpose of going into this journey was it would lead into marriage. It wasn't going to be marriage right then. There's a process between that first part to when you actually eventually walk down the aisle. But it needed to be formal. You needed to know exactly what you were getting into. You needed to know the purpose of what we were doing, because I think there's a well-known term that says where there's no purpose or where purpose is not known, abuse is inevitable. So if we just go long without you knowing where we were going, there was bound to be abuse somewhere there. So that's why I needed to create those guardrails and to create a purpose and an objective of what we were doing.
Okay. It's great to hear from his side of things, exactly why he decided to go that route of formally asking me to be his girlfriend. And then another point of something that we also did separately but together was, I think, both of us going into the dating, we had timelines. We weren't like what he's saying, that we weren't just gonna vibe go with the vibe and just see.
Kick the can down the road.
Yeah, and see how we feel, see how it goes. We had timelines. Like, I remember my timeline was a year. I had been known for, cutting it off at a year, because after a year, if you don't know if you want to be with me, if there's no plans, there's no intentions, then what are we doing? We're just vibing, and like what you're saying, where there's no plan or where there's nothing that's set, then abuse is inevitable.
Yeah.
Then the people in this agreement, non-agreement, are free to do as they please or do what they want. And if you're planning on dating intentionally according to God's way, then you have to have a plan, you have to have a purpose, you have to have timelines. You have to, it's not that you want to put yourselves under pressure, but why are you dating if you don't have a timeline? And some of the things that helped with a timeline was then you can actually, when the word of God, it talks about writing your vision and making it plain, so that when, at the appointed time, it will manifest. So according to God's will. So if you don't have a timeline, then when you go to God to pray, then what are you, you're just shooting in the dark.
Yeah.
But if you have a timeline and you have a purpose and a plan, then you are showing God that you have plan and you have intention. And I know, like, some people, especially in our culture, finances is always an issue. I may say a reason or an excuse, or it determines their timeline. But I would say, if you're going with a timeline and you put it to God, according to God's will, then everything does come together. But if you don't have a timeline and you're like, I'm still just waiting, to get the money, or I'm still just waiting, then you haven't shown God any purposeful thinking, purposeful planning to align with God's will. So it was important for us to have a timeline. So I had a timeline for a year. I think his timeline was shorter because we never got to the year. we never dated for a year. We dated for less than a year. Way less than a year. By the time you proposed,
7 months. But I think your point is clear and very valid. How I viewed it was, again, a timeline is something that gives me a guardrail of what I have to the amount of space and time I have to operate in. It also, and you said you don't want to put yourself under pressure, but for me, it actually put me under the right pressure to say, if my timeline is X, between now and my first milestone, I need to make sure that I start shifting this. I need to make sure that I start saving that. I need to make sure that I start cutting off excess expenses. I remember I moved out of a 2-bedroom apartment and started staying in a bachelor flat because I needed to save money. I needed to actually get a hold of my finances. But I could do that because I was working with a timeline. I had a bit of a deadline. It wasn't a do or die deadline, but it was like God, I'm doing this part. I expect you to then also honor me on the other side. So for me, a timeline is, number one, we had set a purpose for this. Number two, we needed to do it within the lifetime of this, I'm going to call it opportunity that we had created and the momentum that we had created. So the timeline was great. And within that period, 6-7 months of dating afterwards, there was the introductions, there was then the actual cultural stuff that happens, but it all went because I had a timeline and I was chasing that timeline. I had done the work that I needed to perform what I would do as a due diligence and actually make sure that this is the right person that I'd find. So there was no need for me to waste time, I don't know, in hoping to achieve what. So that's why for me the timeline was important.
And I think it's also important to mention, especially from the girl perspective, when we're talking about timeline, when we're talking about age timeline, it's not, you need to also reevaluate your reasons for your timeline. We're not talking about, oh my gosh, the biological clock, or all my friends are getting married and I'm getting old. That's not the timeline we're talking about. We are talking, like when I say that, I had a timeline of a year because my reasons were, if at a year you still don't know where you're taking us,
Yeah.
then this train is going nowhere. Slowly. If a year you are still waiting to see something, you're still waiting to try and figure out something, then we might as well wait 5 years of you trying to figure out something, trying to have goals. Because a lot of people don't have those conversations of where is this relationship. Usually when they have those conversations, you're already 6 years in to the relationship. Then you're like, where is this relationship going? And at that point, I think everything else that happens after that, it's not going to be smooth sailing. The intentions are not going to be correct. So that was my reason for the timeline. He's given his reasons for the timeline. It's not a biological clock timeline. It's not an age timeline. It's aligning with the purpose. What are we doing here?
Yeah, and I think people's timelines are different. You had a year, mine was shorter. But yeah, I think as long as you are doing it with the right purpose, and you're not trying to exert pressure on someone because it's now against your biological clock or whatever it is.
Your friends are getting married.
Oh yeah, or your friends are getting married, or you're doing it for the wrong reasons, right?
Or you've been cooking the pots for too long.
Yeah, but that's also the thing, right? So if you've set a timeline for yourself, you don't give yourself a chance to cook pots and play house, right? You actually get a chance to do house after you get married, right? But yeah, I think for me, probably the last point for this video is we continued having the important conversations. Best believe you get to know a person with time and spending time with them, and just you continue asking the right questions. That will then actually shorten your timeline, because the better you know the person, the more certain you are that this is actually my person. So A, why am I wasting time? And B, this is the right opportunity. Let me just grab hold of the opportunity. So we just continued having very important conversations that were linked to our due diligence. It's just making sure that this person you get to know and understand who's at the core of this person.
And with time, that is a foundation that's very important, because as you grow in marriage throughout, you have created something that allows you to always have important conversations, because things change, people change, life changes, situations happen, and you still need to, you build that foundation of knowing that we have the capability of having important conversations and hard conversations, because that thing never ends. Continuously, after you have kids or whatever, you still have to have conversations to say, you know what, I'm exhausted, I'm tired, I'm not okay, or whatever it is, whatever the case is. But it really sets a good foundation for the rest of your journey. If you're able to know that you need to take time out and in between everything else, and have those important conversations. Yeah, I think that's all for this video. We look forward to sharing with you on the next one. So bye for now.
Cool.